Hi, welcome. My name is Thomas, and I'm the curator of movement image and performance at Dunlop Art Gallery, part of Regina Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's panel discussion on Indigenous comics with guest artists Kevin MacKenzie, Kristy Peigan, Sonny Assu, and Shaun Beyale. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm a first-generation settler of Danish descent, and at Dunlop Art Gallery and Regina Public Library, we acknowledge we're on the lands on which that we're situated on are of Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis. Regina Public Library is committed to working together with Indigenous peoples on the pathway to collaboration, reconciliation, and change. And you can learn more about our reconciliation resources at reginalibrary.ca. Before I get started, I'd like to introduce our guests this evening. We have Kevin MacKenzie. Kevin is Cree Métis, Saskatchewan-based artist based in Brandon, Manitoba, and is a member of the Cowessess First Nation of Saskatchewan Treaty 4. He holds a BFA and MFA from the University of Regina. During his 30-year practice, MacKenzie is exhibited nationally and internationally. Currently, MacKenzie is an assistant professor and faculty member in the IWGI Department of Visual Art at Brandon University, and his work is currently featured at Dunlop Art Gallery, Sherwood Branch, the exhibition Edge of 17. Kristy Peigan is Peigan First Nation member and a freelance artist and designer in Calgary, Alberta. She is an Alberta University of the Arts graduate with a Bachelor of Visual Communications design degree in illustration. Kristy is an artist with a surreal and futuristic style that juxtaposes digital paintings with oils on canvas and for her works. She uses Indigenous teachings and subject matter to portray a modern view of Indigenous voices in portraits and surreal spaces. Kristy continues her work as a freelance artist and designer and as a props maker, education facilitator, youth facilitator, and costume maker. She hopes to continue adding new professional endeavors and experiences to artistic practice. Sonny Assu of the Cowessess Nation was raised in North Delta, BC, over 250 kilometers away from his ancestral home on Vancouver Island. Having been raised as your everyday average suburbanite, it wasn't until he was 8 years old that he uncovered his Cowessess heritage. Later in life, this discovery would be the conceptual focus point that helped him launch his unique art practice. Assu assumes multiple mediums and materials through a lens of pop culture, nostalgia, decolonization, and Indigenous futurisms. Sonny often imbues his work with autobiographical, humorous, and political connotations to deal with the realities of being Indigenous in the colonial state of Canada. Sonny received his BFA from Emily Carter University and his MFA from Concordia University in 2017. After living and working in Vancouver and Montreal, sorry. He had settled with his family in Campbell River, BC in the unceded Algonquin territory. Shaun Beyale was born in Shiprock, New Mexico on the Navajo Nation, and as a child he had a strong interest in comic books, which sparked a passion to draw his favorite superheroes and to eventually create his own comic book. He attended the Institute of American Indian Arts, IAIA, graduated with a BFA, Studio Arts, and started his journey as a full-time artist in 2015. Beyale has shown his work across the world in comic books, art galleries, magazines, video games, and has been busy in the art world. One of his first group exhibitions was at Dunlop Art Gallery when Raven became Spider, which had a positive response and became a traveling exhibition, which was held in several institutions over a period of 3 years. Currently based out of Bloomfield, New Mexico, with his wife and daughter, Beyale creates and shares this empowering art with hopes to inspire future generations and to find their inner monster slayer to face life's challenges. So before I hand things over, just a quick couple of reminders for our viewers this evening. If you have any questions for the artists, please type them in the comments section for the live stream, and questions will be answered near the end of the program this evening. Now I'd welcome everyone to take part in this discussion. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, where do we start?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was a good introduction. It's good to meet all you guys, and don't get to meet in person, but through the power of the digital world, we can meet each other, and that's always great.
Oh yeah, it's great to be here. I think maybe I can start talking about the Edge of 17 and then sort of let everything kind of roll from there, much like we did in our sort of rehearsal.
Yeah.
So the Edge of 17, Thomas and I were working together, and Thomas was my curator, and we were looking for additional material to curate into the exhibition. And I've been working as a sculptor for so many years now, and I remember I used to be a painter many years ago, and so I decided that I would approach the painting again, and I was looking for inspiration, and I realized I had this whole comic book collection of Conan the Barbarian magazines. So literally I have like this is the source material that I'm searching, and so this source material was basically, I inherited this box of magazines. My older brother passed away in the mid-90s, and this is basically the only thing that he left me was this box of Conan magazines. And so I thought, well, this would be some great source material here to do some paintings. And back in the day, this really connects to my exhibition as well, because Edge of 17 works more or less like a portal. It functions as a portal or a time machine, and it goes back in time to collect and preserve these memories from my father, but also now it preserves these memories from my brother, because I was literally 17 years old when my brother was introducing us to these magazines. And at that time, even though Conan came from this sort of fantasy world and he was portrayed as this barbarian, a very heroic barbarian, by the way, I always thought he was Indigenous, like Canadian Indigenous. Like it wouldn't be Conan the Barbarian. For me, it was Conan the Cree. And so the whole idea of time travel was a big part of what this exhibition meant. So I found this magazine, or this magazine within the box. So there's like 60 magazines in this box. And so it says, what if Conan the Barbarian was stranded in the 21st century? I thought this was a great intro into like my talk as well. And so my way of introducing Conan into the 21st century was basically taking him from that portal from the early 80s and late 70s, and sort of reintroduce him as a new Conan the Cree. And so the first image.
Last time we were talking, we called him Creenan.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely connected him as being Cree. So even when I was like young as a kid, I thought he's got to be Cree. Look at his hair, look at his attitude, and his the way he kicked ass and everything. So
he always points with his lips too. So it's hard to not say that he's not.
It makes them native. Yeah, I could relate because I could relate because my uncles they always had a bunch of I had older cousins and uncles that collected comic books. They were a little different than mine, just superhero comics. But a lot of them were like the fantasy, Conan the Barbarian, and I think they could relate to that. The setting of it. It's a fantastical world, but I think the setting was more something that Indigenous people could relate to. He lived more of in a tribal manner, but he lived honorably, and he helped the people around him. He was. The thing I liked about him is like.
Yeah.
There's without there for a little bit, but I could relate because I think I could see a lot of my older uncles collecting Conan comics, the fantasy stuff, and that kind of maybe rubbed off on me. Eventually that's kind of like the stuff once I kind of got older, and I think Conan is like one of those characters that is kind of universal. I think everyone can see a little bit of themselves in it.
Yeah,
so for me, so for me, you could see him like you were saying. You could see him as you could relate with him, and I think he's a character that's good to do with.
So this was my first painting for the exhibition. my first painting from the source material. Basically, I just sort of highlighted one panel from many panels in one of the comics and used the panel and put it onto a large canvas. But I was using Conan, the image, because he's gazing at the audience or whoever's looking at the painting. And then I wanted it to be a little bit ambiguous as far as what the content was. So I just said, he's just saying truth and so it gives the viewer sort of the obligation to participate in the painting, because it can be truth or just about anything. Of course, it's supposed to reference truth and reconciliation, but I always thought it could reference a lot of different things, and mostly like swear words and things like that.
Yeah.
So it'd be like truth and F you. But this was the first one, and I thought it was a successful way of introducing Conan to the 21st century, Conan the Cree. So that was my sort of origins with the comic book or comic strip sort of method or methodology, and but it was also based on Liechtenstein as well. This painting.
Yeah.
This one's very Liechtenstein, and the last one is as well, as far as visual content and how.
Yeah, especially when you were telling us how big they were.
Yeah.
I mean, this doesn't, do justice to it. But when you showed us the picture and you're like, oh, okay, it's like 4 feet wide, I believe you said, or it was pretty big.
Yeah, they're 36 by 38, so they're 3 feet,
Okay.
3.5 feet by 3, almost 4 feet. Yeah. So they have a presence, definitely.
Yeah. And I think comic books, the thing I like about them is they're just a storytelling device, and especially like a traditional oral storytelling, and for hearing some of my traditional stories, when they do tell you the stories, you visualize it in your head, so it's kind of like you kind of see how they're telling you the stories, but you kind of visualize it in your own way. And that's the thing I liked about comic books, is it's like, even though everything is given to you visually and the words and dialogue, but I think the thing I liked about it is the storytelling device, and it is asking you to participate in it, because in between the panels, it's like, as an audience member, you kind of fill in the space in between, and that's the thing I liked about comic books, was like, it was a little different in movies, a little different in books, and to me it kind of reminded me of more of like hearing traditional oral stories. You kind of have to participate in it by listening, getting something back from it. And that's the thing I think good comic books and good stories is, it can be used, beyond just entertainment. You can entertain people with it, but you can, use it as a storytelling device to, teach morals, teach things that I think people, every society, want something to, to learn something from their arts. And I think, as artists, that's kind of one of our responsibilities, is just, share our experiences and the way we see the world. And I think people can relate to that, and people like that, and may not please everybody, but the people that do get it, I think, appreciate it.
I think for comic books, it's interesting, because for me, it was my first introduction to art, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to become an artist, was because of comic books. A lot of my earlier work, when Thomas was reading my bio, like, using that conceptual focal point of me as a kid in the 80s, the mid 80s, when I started reading comics and collecting comics, and pairing it up with modern conversations around indigeneity and identity and politics. And it's a way to forward these conversations. But it's also funny, because back when I was in art school, so like 20 years ago, when I started working on that particular series, comic books and comic culture was still considered like an offshoot.
Lowbrow.
It was lowbrow, right? So it wasn't really considered as something that was part of the conversation. But now,
Exactly.
because comics are so ingrained into our society over the last 20 years, with the start of the Marvel movies in the early 2000s and all kind of stuff, and how it's come to today, where this kind of outsider culture, this lowbrow culture, has now become part of
it's become pop culture.
It's become more part of pop culture in general.
Yeah.
It's more mainstream now.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's interesting to see how that's grown and developed, and you can kind of see it and how Kristy is like developing her identity around it in terms of your cosplay and the work that you do. It's interesting to see that that's accepted now, because if you were to take you now and bring you back 20 years ago when Kevin was talking about time travel, you would have been like, why are you doing this? Are you nuts?
Hey,
Yeah.
I was still made fun of for being like really weird and kind of like into comic books, and I definitely was the kid that like brought manga to class when I was in junior high. But again, it was kind of a bonding experience because it was a smaller class size, and I was the only Indigenous student actually growing up almost all the way through college, or the former Alberta College of Art and Design here in Calgary. But yeah, like I was really excited to be on this panel and kind of show and talk about kind of some of my experience with pop culture, Indigenousness, and trying to tie that in as an identity into my art and cosplay, because it was only semi-recent where I kind of had both of my identities kind of meshed together as of this year, because the cosplay was just something super fun, really nice and safe. And then the art was kind of where the vulnerability was, as being an Indigenous person. But seeing Conan the Barbarian as an Indigenous character in terms of representation, we didn't get a lot of that growing up. Even for me as like a 90s baby, I didn't get a whole lot growing up. We had the Pocahontas and things like that. So Conan the Barbarian, funny enough, was a love that I adopted from my mom, because she was a teenage. She was about 15, 16 when they started coming out, and she was collecting them. And I've been slowly rebuilding her collection over the years, and there's actually like one or two of the comic book shops that set up at Calgary Expo that refer to me as the Conan girl, because all I do is go over there and raid through their boxes for the Conan's editions I don't have yet. But yeah, like Conan was a really strong character for me growing up. When I started adopting a love for Conan the Barbarian about the same time my mom did, at her age range. So seeing all the different storylines and the wanderlust and things like that Conan was going through, and all these like moral compass things, it was a really nice way to kind of see someone that was of color, that like looked like my uncles and things like that, like a character that was really strong and brave and traveling all over. So it kind of helped inspire me to kind of be brave and put myself out there, especially living in the city.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how that lack of representation back in the various generations, like in the 80s or the 90s, how it just really wasn't there. There were some like tertiary characters here and there. I think for me, the biggest draw for Indigenous characters for me was in the New Mutants with Warpath and Danielle Moonstar, Mirage, and all those kind of characters that came out of that. And so it's interesting to look back at those kind of historical characters. And I think New Mutants was interesting because they really gave a focus on the story and development of those characters, where if they were just like, in the regular X-Men ethos, they probably wouldn't have got as much of the page time as they did. And I think it's beneficial because now we could see them all over the place. And I think a lot of the work that I've been doing over the past couple of years with recollecting comics to destroy them, to make art out of them in various ways, I go through and I try and find those instances of representation from those 80s comics, and I try and highlight those characters within those paintings and collages that I make. So yeah, it's interesting to see that develop, and even like what you're doing, Shaun, with working with the Echo character and bringing that ethos in, and seeing how these characters are getting more page time and even airtime through various licenses and TV shows and whatever. So it's great to see that, because that lack of representation wasn't there. I mean, for me, it was different because I'm white passing. So, I mean, representation was always in front of me. But I knew that there was Indigenous desires within me to see that in those various places.
Yeah. And that's
I think representation. Yeah. Oh, sorry. But
No,
yeah, I
you go
think
ahead.
representation is, good because even though it was lacking, I think there was the few characters that we did find when we were younger. Yeah, like the X-Force characters, those were some that I liked. And then the ones that I kind of, grew up to was like Turok, the dinosaur hunter.
Oh
And that
yeah.
one was because it was bringing back a old golden age character, but setting him in modern times with in a new superhero universe. But the thing I liked about him is he kept his traditions and stuff, but he still, he adapted the modern ways and stuff, but he still kept his tradition, and he never let anybody boss him around. But he was always strong and capable, and the other superheroes, they treated him pretty respectfully, and he was one that I really liked. But the one that I kind of found me and my brother really liked was a character called Enoch Nakai, and he was a Navajo guy that was in the Predator books,
Oh yeah.
called Predator Big Game.
Wow.
And yeah, the first time I read that, and I was like, whoa, he's speaking Navajo. And to him, when he first saw Predator, to him it was like a Navajo witch. He thought it was a shapeshifter because it was invisible and it killed. And when he finally did see it, he thought it was because he thought it was one of the monsters. So he had to go through a ceremony, you know, do a monster slayer, and then he finally, he was one of the few people that actually went hand-to-hand combat with the Predator and survived. And at the end of the comic, he came back with the Predator head, and to me, it was just cool to see a Navajo character that wasn't just stuck in the past and that wasn't just stoic, but he was set in modern times, and he had modern problems and stuff, but he actually chose to face them and stand up and do something, and he actually was protecting some of the tribal elders that were being, like, some of their sheep were getting killed by the Predator. And so to see something like that in the story, even though it may not have been by an Indigenous person, I like that it was respectfully told, and the person in there wasn't belittled, and it kind of showed that you can do characters like this. And so for me, seeing something like that as a little kid, that was pretty cool, because I was like, yeah, we had someone that fought a Predator. I mean, yeah, it's fictional, but as a little kid, you can see something like that. And then growing up, just seeing little characters here and there, and then seeing something like a Tribal Force by John Proudstar, seeing something like that when I was probably in high school, and that was the first superhero team, that comic book that came out, and it was set in New Mexico too. And after I saw that, I went and created my own superhero team for a drawing contest in a comic shop in town. And, doing something like that kind of inspired me, and that's kind of how I came up with my character Ayla the Monster Slayer. I had an early version of her back then. That's something I still work on, and that's something I try to use that character to promote empowerment, because I believe in empowerment through art, because I think any type of art empowers people. I think sometimes people forget that, and I think just using any type of art can empower yourself. And as artists, and for me as a comic book person, I really relate to what Spider-Man said. With great power comes great responsibility. With my power, artistic power. So I try to share that with the community. I try to do things just beyond comic books and stuff. I try to do stuff with like children's book, like Scholastics. I got to share some of my tribal history, doing a Navajo code talker story, and then help creating, an Indigenous character, a Navajo character called Spider Weaver in the Marvel Strike Force game. And so that's one of my favorite characters growing up, Spider-Man. But to help create a new version that's inspired by my people, and and you can see it in the video game. That one's nice because it's more of a global audience. So I get to share some of my culture with that. And I think as artists, we can use technology and use pop culture to promote ourselves, and to promote the beauty of our culture. But we show that we're still living in modern times, but at the same time, I think we can move forward and use this technology, but never forget who we are, where we came from.
Yeah, no, and that's something I love adopting as well. Just using kind of culture and like Indigenous representation as a teaching tool. If I could actually maybe get Eric to show the Native Wonder Woman and Native America for me, potentially. I don't care which order. But in the comic book, the comic expo scene, or the comic expo environment, it's so mainstream these days, going with your family, going to comic expo or fan expo. San Diego Comic-Con. It's so socially accepted now. And for me, as an Indigenous person and artist, I get to not only represent a community of people and women as well, Indigenous women. I was really inspired with the representation of seeing Chief Jean Braverock actually in the Wonder Woman film, and hearing Blackfoot, hearing him say that, and hearing Wonder Woman talk to him back in Blackfoot as well. That was so significant to me, and I loved the new design of the new Wonder Woman. So I decided I had to be her. But it's been so empowering, just like Shaun was saying. And with that, with the art pieces I've made too, I do a lot of artist alley stuff and vendor markets. And I find that with a lot of the art that I sell for prints, a lot of the Native America and the Blackfoot style Wonder Woman print have always sold so well. And it's a combination of both, sorry, not these pieces. These are the, it's the Wonder Woman and Captain America art prints. I find that people really get excited seeing Indigenous art in those comic expo or fan expo environments. They really love seeing the representation. And for me, it's been very validating having not just only Indigenous people and my relatives and cousins coming and buying art from me. It's people on like in a global platform, people coming and really appreciating the voice of what I'm trying to attach to some of these pop culture characters and indigenizing them and embodying them for myself in my cosplay. It's something that I'm finding really, really special because people seem to really crave it, not just Indigenous community, but people on Turtle Island really want to pay homage to the original peoples, to us in this land, and what our involvement is in identity and pop culture. But yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of leapfrog off of what Shaun was saying with the representation, because getting to be a cosplay guest at both Fan Expo this past April at Calgary, and a cosplay guest actually at this past OdaFest, having people, especially young kids, seeing someone who's Indigenous, being a pro cosplayer or artist is so special for them, because they get to see something that they can aspire to, whether it's, the comic books, the arts, the cosplay, video game characters. It gives such identity and validation to a lot of the youth. And I do a lot of youth programming, and they just get really jealous when I can talk about their favorite cosplayers and Twitch streamers and things like that. So but yeah, it's been a wonderful time, and I've received absolutely nothing but validation for the identity and for the Indigenous inclusion in these spaces, especially in a time where, we didn't have representation. So it's kind of up to us as adults now to kind of create those spaces now.
It's also creating, authentic spaces too, right? Even though you're riffing on popular culture like Wonder Woman and Captain America and whatever, you're bringing your own twist to it, and I think that's what's the youth is really drawn to. They could see it, and the work that I've been doing has been going on for 20 years now, and it's still refreshing and humbling to know that a youth can come up and say, hey, I really appreciate your work, because it allows me to think outside of the box of what is prescribed to us as being our own individual cultures, whether it's Likwata, Kokwakiwak, or Haida, or Cree, or Anishinaabe, or whatever, right? So it gives people the understanding that we're not just confined to this one box of quote unquote tradition, which isn't a monoculture at all. There's so many different Indigenous traditions from across Turtle Island. It's it's interesting to see that people could be really drawn to it and take it on as their own and make it their own. I guess when was your first? We know Kevin's first introduction to comics through Conan. What was everyone else's first introduction to comics and the love of that branch of pop culture?
Oh, for me, it's actually before I could remember. I think I have pictures before I could walk. I'm wearing like Spider-Man shirts, but yeah, I grew up on Spider-Man, Superman, and Iron Man. And those were my first. There's me,
That's awesome.
5-year-old
So
me with my
cute.
brother, and
Nice.
my little toy at my grandma's house. And see, those were Superman pajamas. And I love those so much that my mom actually remade the cape longer. She made the little shorts and the little boots on them, and so she made it better. And so it's nice. I mean, I've always loved superheroes, especially Superman, since I was young. And my brother there, Seamus Beyale, he's also a professional artist. He does comic books and he does advertising, storyboarding. And so for me and him, we grew up as artists. We grew up on res. We didn't have electricity, so a lot of the times we were drawing at night with kerosene lamps, and but our passion for art was always there. And so for me, just I think I've always just gravitated towards it since I was small. And then, growing up without electricity, you don't have like VCRs to watch movies or TV. So for me, it was like comic books were always there. And then I went to boarding school when I was younger. So I think, that gave me comfort, just always having those stories in there with me. And that was my little escape from the world because, I'll be a little res kid living out in the res, but I can go to these fantastical worlds and go to New York City with like Spider-Man, hang out in those comic books, and that was the thing I liked about them. But the thing I liked about superheroes was the good and bad, like teaching you stuff, teaching you things. And for me, those were my early introductions to comic books, and then as I started getting older, I was getting more into X-Men. So during junior high and high school, I was really big into X-Men. I didn't realize at the time, but I think I related to them because they were more of outsiders amongst the superheroes. They weren't like the Avengers, who were like, to me, the Avengers were like the celebrities, the jocks. Everyone loved them. But like things I liked about Spider-Man and X-Men, they were outsiders. The X-Men, they kind of had that racial tension because they're mutants. And so for me, even though the world feared and hated them, they always tried to do good and protect the people. And even the bad guys and the good guys in the X-Men universe, like there was parallels, and with the civil rights movement in the '60s. Like Magneto, the bad guy, was more like Malcolm X, but he wasn't truly bad. He just wanted his people not to be persecuted. He was coming from the Nazis. He was a Jewish being persecuted by the Nazis, and to see him grow up and see his people being persecuted again, like a repeat of what he grew up in. So for me, he was different than other supervillains, who just wanted to take over the world. He just wanted to, just have peace for his people. And then Professor X on the X-Men, he was more like peaceful, coexistent, working with each other. And so. And the thing I liked about the X-Men, they were an international team. They had people from all over, They didn't have like people from, one like America. They had like people from, all over different countries. They had people from different nations working together. And that's the thing I liked about them, it's like, even though they were being, the people feared them, they were always just trying to do good. And, I think looking back, you can see, some of the social issues they were talking about, but as a kid you don't realize it. You just thought it was cool. And I think now I can realize some of that stuff maybe rubbed off on me, and I can appreciate it now as an adult. And then going to college, you get introduction into like the whole indie world, independent comics, and that was nice because it's a little different than superhero comics, a little different than the mainstream stuff. You could just have a story just about a regular day in someone's life, or some abstract thing, or something like science fiction. So that's the thing I liked about comic books. Is it could tell any kind of stories. And then now people are getting into anime and manga, and that's a whole new potential there too, because it opens up a new vast, like different type of storytelling. And I think people appreciate that. And so for me, I just like to see the evolution of the sequential art. Comic books, I grew up in the '80s and '90s comics, and then kind of fell off in 2007. What you kind of life gets gets in the way, you start having kids and stuff. But I still appreciate comic books, and it's always good to go back and do work in there. So for me, it's a lifelong thing.
I guess for me, the Archie comics were really fun and cute, but they were hard to relate to because there wasn't really anyone in there that looked or sounded like me or like anyone I knew.
Oh, yeah.
So the Archie comics were kind of just cute little reads, just little slice of life things. But my uncles were actually teenagers, so they had a really good collection of random comic books. So I got to read some of the old Alien comics, which were definitely not age appropriate at the time.
Yeah. That was my brother. He liked those Aliens and Predator comics.
Yeah, they were so good though. Never in sequential order though, unfortunately. And then a lot of actually the old Selena Kyle, the Purple Catsuit one comic books, and the Batman comic books were kind of what I really liked. So I always kind of really loved DC Universe, clearly, out of everything. But I definitely just enjoyed kind of just a lot of the like moral struggles in it. And it was also just really fun reading some of those comic books because it's a storytelling thing. We didn't necessarily need to have power or a VHS player that actually worked for me to entertain myself, and it got to the point where I could read these comic books and look at these movie covers from like the old VHS tapes and redraw those poster designs and redraw the characters I really liked. And then as I got older, and that's kind of what was the gateway drug really to the cosplay eventually, was drawing all my favorite characters or drawing myself. I shared the story at OdaFest, drawing myself in different kinds of like universes from the video games and comic books I was playing and reading. And eventually it just wasn't enough to draw it. Eventually I wanted to be the characters. So cosplay has been like a hugely empowering thing and something that kind of just led me down a path of, self-expression, especially with the art, just a lot of self-confidence as well. And yeah, like that's kind of what I started with was those comic books, whatever my uncles had stashed away, and I could just dig them out while they were at school.
Yeah, I've always loved comics. I mean, Conan was one of the main characters that I always gravitated towards, but I always looked at Spider-Man and who's another one that was a really big one. I liked the Punisher back in the day as well for some reason.
Yeah, the anti-hero.
He's not indigenous, but he just he's very empowering to himself. But also my sort of the way I've introduced the Conan character now, it's very contemporary. And so basically I'm giving Conan a voice in today's language and today's slang. And so this is my last painting I did for the show. Maybe it's the other one. Yeah, this one. Yeah. And so this was my last painting. I did 4 paintings for the exhibition, but this I think is the most successful one in the sense that it's more of a painting, a pop art style. But then I was looking for some content as far as what my character is going to say. And then I was looking at the word noble and then how we're going to connect that to the noble savage from the 1700s and that sort of narrative not from the indigenous perspective. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to use the word noble, but this is from actually the movie Casablanca, where Rick at the very end of the movie, he's trying to talk to his girlfriend and he says, I'm not good at being noble. And so I thought I'm going to use that line and then just add the words just deadly. And so deadly is like the ultimate and that's contemporary language. So Conan's using contemporary language and popular culture to empower the viewer and indigenous people. So
could also be Skoden.
Yeah.
What is
the barbarian?
What is best
Yeah.
in life? Skoden.
Yeah, Skoden, yeah. That's a good one.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I was really happy with this one because it really related to pretty much everything that sort of I grew up with, and everything was deadly when I grew up, you know, and still today. And I was asking some of my students, does everybody still use the word deadly? And they go, of course they use deadly. And one of my students made these earrings that they had like alphabets on it, and she wrote the word deadly on the earrings. I said, oh, that's awesome. So deadly is still a relevant term in Indigenous language or Indigenous slang. So yeah, this was my last painting. So it was, I thought I'd end off with on a high note with my painting.
I guess I'll use kind of that to launchpad in terms of like bringing an Indigenous voice and kind of bringing the viewer back using that pop culture character to kind of help launch forward an Indigenous kind of point of view. And if we want to bring up actually the image of the Wonder Woman cosplay with the red handprint, I took the opportunity as one of the cosplay guests at Fan Expo Calgary to it was the weekend prior to Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Day on May 5th. And as Wonder Woman, as the only person of color that was on the guest roster, I thought it would be appropriate for me to take advantage and not tell anybody that I was doing this and just show up to the convention like this, fully understanding I might have to fist fight someone in the Palomino lot, but I showed up and I wanted to bring awareness and use the platform that I was gifted with at the Calgary Expo as one of the cosplay guests to highlight an Indigenous issue, specifically for Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people that were stolen away. So I used the platform and my position to use the red handprint to show and in protest, and also as an activism to show and highlight and bring awareness to the issue. And I was very pleased with the reception of it. People were very kind about it. People were very thankful and grateful. And people that came up and didn't know what was happening, they came and asked for clarification. And I didn't have to fist fight anyone, which was, you know, the armor might have had something to do with that to deter people, but you know, I can throw a punch. But it was a really lovely way to kind of not only bring myself and reconnect back into the character, because when I'm in a convention in a costume, especially as Diana, I don't have to convince someone to like me because they already love Wonder Woman. Mm-hmm. Versus me as an artist, an Indigenous person, there's a vulnerability because I don't necessarily have that safety net of people coming up to me and already automatically loving me. So having that red handprint and advocacy was a way to tie myself back into the character for people to know who I was and what I stood for and what Wonder Woman probably would have stood for, right? Because, you know, she stood for everyone, for all women in love. So yeah, so that's what I took advantage of to do. And I didn't get in trouble, which, you know, yay. But in terms of like the Indigenous voice and everything, I think the futurism and kind of breaking down people's kind of mindsets on thinking of us only in a past tense way and thinking of us as modern peoples and thinking about us in a futurescape, you know, including us in that Blade Runner aesthetic, you know, in the, you know, the synth wave, cyberpunk. That's a huge thing that I really love to do in my artwork and everything. The one back there.
Yeah.
But I was really excited to come and kind of share the stories and talk with everyone here.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah. But, you know, I think that's good because, you know, I think like the mainstream culture, but I think it's getting less now where, you know, they think of us in the past tense. You know, I think especially within these past 5 years, I think, you know, as a whole, Indigenous people, we're starting to make our voices heard more. And I think, you know, people are starting to hear it, you know. And I think, you know, doing, especially doing stuff in pulp culture, you know, I think it gives us another audience to, you know, relay that message to. And I think, you know, people especially in comic book pulp culture stuff, they're more open to it because, you know, they do deal with these fantastical worlds, these concepts, and all this stuff. And I think by sharing it through these avenues, it's a nice way of for them to engage us as the audience, engage us as an artist and individual, but also get them interested, maybe, and
Comic book culture
to know us as a
comic book culture
as a
accessible.
people. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
No, I think comic book culture is accessible, and I think that's why people gravitate towards it. And if there's an Indigenous voice involved, I think that they gravitate towards it even stronger.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we're all trying to achieve in some sort of form.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that 5-year cycle, like 5 years ago seemed so different, and post-COVID and in kind of like the culture and mainstream now is so vastly different. People are so much more accepting and like accepting of that personal responsibility to educate themselves too.
Yeah. And I think, like the comic conventions, especially something like Indigenous Comic Con, I think that's done, that's also bring, educated people about, that there are people doing things like this, that do comic books, that do, film, that do stuff like this, that are native. We're just trying to bring, our unique voices and trying to share our experiences, but use this mainstream avenue of, the showing the whole. Because the thing I like about, doing comic books and working with other people is kind of having, especially using the internet, you have an audience beyond just your own little community. It's good to show beyond that because, I think it's good to share the beauty of what we have with the world. And, it's good that we represent ourselves without having a middleman represent us, and I think that's the power of the internet, I think, because I didn't use the internet really until I got to college. So that just shows how much, and that was like 20 years ago. So when I graduated high school, there was internet around, but it wasn't like everyone had their own. Mainly the people that lived in town or the people that were more rich tended to have it. So it wasn't until college that I actually got to use the internet. And then even then, it was still just that first 10 years, just trial and error. Social media was just barely getting started with like things like MySpace and then seeing the next cycle of that, like seeing Facebook and then seeing, Twitter and then stuff like Instagram and then, trying to learn that and harness it and try to use that to, promote ourselves. So for me, once I kind of went on my professional, art journey, I started trying to, use social media. So for me, I use Facebook and Instagram. Those are my two, especially once I started using Instagram, I kind of started building my audience to a broader audience, people beyond just that knew me, like in the Santa Fe area where I used to work, and then, people outside of my area. That's when I started doing things like with Dunlop Gallery. They reached out to me, artists out here in Mexico, but I'm glad they reached out to me because, that kind of brought me out of my comfort zone and, was speaking to a different audience that may not be familiar with who I was as a person or my people. And it was just nice to, bring my culture and me as a person and show my world, show my voice up there. And ever since I've done that show, things just been slowly, gaining momentum and then doing little shows here and there, doing little projects here and there. And then, now it leads up to stuff like this. I can meet other artists, other artists and, can do discussions like this and, show, people that are watching this, they can also, hopefully get something out of this. And, especially the youth, I think it's good for them to, see something like this and, hopefully that gets them to engage in doing something with their art and, looking to the future.
Thanks so much, Shaun, and everyone here. This has been a really inspiring discussion. I did want to open up to any questions, and we do have one here from Raphael, which I think everyone would like to know. Where and when can everyone catch each of you in person? I think that's going to be a pretty broad territory, but I think we'll have some good opportunities here.
Okay, well, I'll go first because I'll actually be I'm glad that Raphael reached out because I'll actually be participating next month in IACon, an Indigenous Comic Con that Raphael is part of promoting. it's good because he reached out to me, and you know, I'll have a table there, and it's going to be my first, you know, Comic Con I've done in the past like over 2 years. You know, I've just been doing things from home, and so this will be a good time, you know, for people that want to come out, you know, to meet me, to go check it out, and also, you know, just to check out the Aya Con, because you know it'll be good because you know, it brings a lot of different artists from all over, and you know, get to showcase, you know, the best of what everyone has, and I think it'll be good because it'll be in downtown Denver. You know, I've only been to Denver once, so it'll be good for me, you know, to check out that area. And you know, Indigenous Comic Con, they're very fun. You know, it's good to see something like that. So, I mean, other places people can see me is on Instagram, Facebook, just under Shaun Beyale, and those are the 2 places that I try to speak with.
Well, I'm going to be having part of a group show in Nanaimo here in British Columbia at the end of June, called "The Gutters Are Elastic." So it's a show that's looking at contemporary artists who are exploring comic book culture, but the whole premise of the show is like looking at the gutters of the comic books and like how that negative space can carry the conversation forward. So I'm going to be making some new works for that exhibit, which I'm pretty excited about. And yeah, I just got a bunch of shows coming up over the next year and a half, mostly here in Canada. But yeah, you can catch me on Instagram under Sonny Assu, and yeah.
Should I go next?
Sure, that'd be great.
All right, cool. I just wrapped my Indigenous artist in residence at the Calgary Public Library. So I will be doing a lot of actually contract work from home for 3 public city art illustration works. So when those go up, you'll be able to go see some of my work, but the best place to find me will be on social media. I'm Kristicles GG on all social platforms. And I think the next show, I would love to go down into the States to Indigenous Comic Con next year. It's absolutely a dream. I don't care what anyone says, I'm going next year. But I think the next show I think I will be at Edmonton Fan Expo in September.
Oh, I can be reached at Brandon University, or you can see me drive my hot rod around Brandon, down in the prairies. I'm going to be I'll be at the Prairie Art Institute in Regina, I think on June 15th and 17th. It's going to be a really great thing to participate in, and looking forward to coming back to Regina. I'm always making a homecoming back in Regina, so I'll be there for that. Other than that, I'm not sure what's going on. I think I have a solo show next year, and two solo shows next year, I think. And but I'm always here in Brandon now, so
That's great. You're always welcome in Regina. Everyone here.
My hometown.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been a really fascinating and great discussion, and I think it'll definitely continue. If anyone has any last comments, I do encourage you to add them to the chat, or also any of our guests here if you want to make any final comments here.
Oh, well, for me, I just guess, just keep believing in yourself, just do what you want to do. And, for me, like I said, I believe in empowerment through art. So I think with any kind of art you do, it doesn't have to be drawing, could be, writing, skateboarding, and making music. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a positive way of living. And, life can get hard sometimes, but, I think through the power of, just believing in yourself and, being creative, I think that, that's a good positive way of living your life. Just try to be your best, and
Definitely, that's great. Thanks so much, Shaun. That's a perfect ending. Well, I'd like to thank Kevin McKenzie, Kristy Peigan, Sonny Assu, and Shaun Beyale for joining us, and also everyone that joined us online. And look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.